Today, we're going to talk about a single moment that completely shifted the course of modern psychology. We're talking about Carl Jung, one of the great minds of the Western world, and how he was pulled out of a massive, 15-year-long professional crisis by a single ancient Chinese text. This is the incredible story of that text, The Secret of the Golden Flower. And let's just start with Jung's own words because they really set the stage. Imagine this, it's 1928, and this translation of an old Taoist text lands on his desk. Now for Jung, this wasn't just some interesting academic read. No, this was a lifeline. He'd been professionally stuck for 15 years, and this ancient manuscript was the rescue he had all but given up hope for.
So, what exactly was this problem? What kind of dead end was Jung stuck in for a decade and a half? Well, he'd been exploring the deepest, most uncharted territory of the human mind, what he called the collective unconscious. But the things he was finding there were so radical, so strange, he had no way to prove they were real. He was like an explorer who'd found a new world, but had no map and no way to convince anyone back home it existed. Or so he thought.
For 15 long years, Jung was charting this vast inner world. He kept seeing these powerful, recurring symbols in his patients' dreams, symbols that had no modern parallel. He looked everywhere for clues, in ancient traditions like Gnosticism, but the connections were always too fragmented, too thin. He was, for all intents and purposes, completely lost. But here's the thing. Jung came to believe this problem wasn't just his. It was a problem for the entire Western world. He saw our whole culture as dangerously one-sided, completely obsessed with intellect and rational thought, while ignoring or worse, actively suppressing our deeper instinctual nature. He had a powerful name for this kind of cultural arrogance, godless hybris. So from Jung's perspective, the West had allowed its spirit to just degenerate into pure cold intellect. We valued being right over being whole. We prized dominance over balance. You contrast that with the Eastern approach, which pursued understanding through lived experience. It was about an all-inclusive consciousness that actually embraces opposites, like yin and yang. The goal wasn't to conquer, but to become whole.
And this is where the secret of the golden flower comes in. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. It was the external, objective proof that finally validated everything he had been discovering on his own. Can you imagine the relief? It was like finding a perfectly detailed map from an ancient, completely separate civilization that described the exact same inner world he had been exploring all alone.
But Jung immediately raised a huge red flag, and it's summed up in this ancient saying. He was absolutely not telling Westerners to just start chanting and doing Chinese yoga. That, he argued, would just be a form of spiritual tourism, right? A kind of escapism. A way of avoiding the really hard work of facing our own culture's deep-seated problems.
At the heart of this text is the concept of the Tao, and it's so important to understand this. We are not talking about a belief system. Jung saw it as a psychological process. The text itself tells us this. The character for Tao is made up of signs for head, or consciousness, and going. It is the conscious way to heal the split between our thinking mind and our deeper nature. The goal is to make life conscious and to make consciousness truly alive.
Jung was absolutely clear about this. Our task is to heal our own civilization's specific neurosis. Blindly copying Eastern methods would actually make things worse. It would just strengthen the ego's control against the unconscious, which is the very problem we're trying to solve. The point wasn't to import a solution, but to use this Eastern map to find the treasure buried right in our own psychic backyard.
So how did this map actually help? Well, it provided a symbolic language that perfectly, and I mean perfectly, matched the images that were emerging from Jung's modern patients, people in Zurich who had never even heard of Taoism. For Jung, this was it. This was the proof. The human psyche, across all cultures and all time, speaks a universal language. Which of course leads to the big question. When the psyche tries to heal itself, when it strives for wholeness, what kind of symbol does it produce? What does psychic unity actually look like when it bubbles up from the depths? The answer Jung found, both in this ancient text and in his own clinic, is the mandala. The word is Sanskrit for circle, and this symbol isn't just a pretty design. It functions as a kind of protective shield. It's the psyche's own natural attempt to create order and defend the very core of our personality from the chaos of life.
And here's the kicker. This symbol is absolutely universal.
You see it in the highly developed mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism. You see it in early Christian art, with Christ in the center and the four evangelists at the cardinal points. And then, and this is the part that just blew Jung's mind, you see it in the spontaneous drawings of his modern patients who knew nothing about this stuff. They weren't copying anything. This symbol was innate, an archetype emerging from the collective unconscious.
And this brings us full circle right back to the text. The golden flower itself is a mandala symbol. That's what it represents. It's the light of consciousness, the Tao, being born from the darkness of the unconscious. It is the perfect image for the union of opposites.
Okay, so this all makes sense as a theory, but how do we actually do it? How do we cultivate this wholeness? Well, it requires a profound, fundamental shift in our perspective. It's a journey from the ego's constant claim, I live, to the much deeper, humbling realization, it lives me. The method is beautifully paradoxical. It's called Wu Wei, or action through non-action. It's really the art of letting things happen. So instead of trying to force your thoughts and feelings, you just observe them, objectively, without judgment. Instead of fighting what emerges from inside, you accept it. It is this disciplined act of letting go that allows the personality's true center to finally reveal itself. And the result of this is totally revolutionary, especially for the Western mind. The ego, the part of us we think of as the boss, the CEO of our lives, it gets demoted. It's no longer the center of your universe. A new, more stable, more complete center emerges from that space between the conscious and the unconscious. Jung called this new center the self.
This quote captures that transformation perfectly. The guidance of your life passes from the noisy, anxious ego to a larger, wiser center. You stop trying to force everything and instead find yourself carried by the current of a bigger life.
The end goal here is a kind of profound liberation. It's about developing a consciousness that can experience all the world's chaos without being pulled apart by it. The text uses this amazing phrase, the diamond body, an indestructible core personality that is finally deeply at peace with itself and with life as it is. And this really highlights a fundamental difference. The West has historically tended to look outward, to imitate an external, historical divine figure. The Eastern path described here looks inward. It's about cultivating the divine potential, the Tao, that is already growing organically inside every single individual.
So this all leaves us with a pretty challenging question, especially for our modern, achievement-obsessed culture. What if the whole point of your life isn't about achieving more, or controlling more, or forcing life into the shape your ego wants? What if the real purpose is simply to allow your truest, deepest self to finally come to life?